you stopped the broadcast. You didn't stop sharing.
Oh, crap.
So I reconnected the broadcast, and we should be up live here in a few seconds. But if
I
you,
hit the wrong button.
if you go ahead and stop sharing your screen, then I'll throw mine on.
There we go.
Great.
Sorry, folks. I hit the wrong button. We're back.
Okay, so hopefully you're seeing my screen right now. And I, of course, started on the wrong one. Are you seeing my screen okay, Matt?
I am not.
I don't see your screen either.
Alrighty, let me hit screen share. Oh, there I'm seeing. Okay, got it. Share. Is that working? How's that look? Okay.
Your camera's off. I don't know if you want to turn your camera.
No, I'm going to leave it off. I lost my internet during a talk yesterday, so I'm just going to be cautious. I'll come back on at the end here. So again, my name's Dianne Barton, and I'm going to introduce you to the National Tribal PFAS Working Group. This is an ad hoc group that came together just in 2020, and it's currently composed of members from 5 different tribal partnership groups that have interest in PFAS. The National Tribal Water Council, the Tribal Waste and Response Steering Committee, the National Tribal Toxics Council that I chair, the Tribal Science Council, and the Tribal Pesticide Partnership Council. The objectives of the group are really to evaluate issues in addressing PFAS across Indian country. And I'm going to talk about a lot of these elements as what we've achieved in this last year. Tribal outreach, we advocate for funding and monitoring to improve tribal research, analysis, and response capacity, particularly in the areas tribes are interested in. And then we've developed comment letters and templates to help tribes respond to actions coming out of the federal agencies. So based on surveys that our group has taken at Tribal Land Environment Forum, we know that tribes have many concerns about PFAS, particularly coming from drinking water, but also in knowing more about the impact of PFAS on tribal lifeways and other resources such as fish, game, plants, and cultural practices. Matt told us about the bioaccumulative nature of this contaminant, and we see it getting into these tribal resources. In fact, we know several states have enacted consumption advisories for PFAS in fish and game. This deer meat one was particularly interesting. It was the state of Michigan found PFAS in deer as high as 548 parts per billion in muscle tissue. Of course, that's what people are eating, and over 6,000 accumulating in deer livers that resulted in this avoid deer meat advisory. More recently, though, measurements have limited the geographic scope of this advisory in Michigan, which is really good. And I just saw a talk earlier, maybe it was just last week, that showed measurements in Minnesota are showing much lower levels. But we need to know this. What we want to know is how important it is to monitor these resources so we're aware of what's going on with our foods. And then because of the importance of ecological toxicity of tribes, what I did here is went to that link that Matt showed on EPA's ecological toxicity link from his presentation. And it takes you here to this webpage that shows you how to access the EcoTox database that has quite a bit of data on representative laboratory animals like mice and rats and stuff like that. But really, there's no information at all on ecotox values for deer, for tribal foods like wild rice or other sorts of plants like that tribes interact with on a daily basis. So more work is needed for finding out the ecotox effects of PFAS on animals that are very important to tribal lifeways. This bioaccumulation model on fish is really good. It's a good report. It brings together a lot of data on this important issue for fish tissue. So the PFAS work group has done quite a bit of outreach. This is a link to our webpage. We kind of just put this up a couple months ago. It has a description of our program, and presentations on this link here are going to be put you can link to those up here, and we'll post this one up there once I turn it in. We've also put out a PFAS Facebook page where we try to post events that are going on that might be of interest to you there. So one thing that we learned from the tribal survey we did is that tribes really want to understand more about how their own lands and the lands that they're harvesting and doing hunting, gathering in, how are those being, or are those contaminated by PFAS? And Matt mentioned the EPA analytical tool, and that's a really good one. I've been on that website. It's really good. But in addition to knowing where PFAS has been accumulated, we want to know about the PFAS locations that also affect usual and accustomed areas that tribes used for subsistence hunting and gathering. So we went to one of our work group members worked with this environmental working group. I have their website right here, and just built a map of the PFAS detects that they list on their website and mapped those with tribal lands shown in the lighter blue here. And as I said, tribal resources are not limited to those drinking water systems. So within 5 miles, which I know is probably not even representative of the areas that provide subsistence resources to tribes, how close are those to tribal lands? And so we just kind of built this database, and this presentation that we did for TLEF is also on our website, but found from the EWG database over 2,955 sites on their database that were within 5 miles of tribal lands. And working with EWG, we are able to break that down by state level, by county level. This slide just shows PFAS contamination sites within 5 miles of tribal lands. I see a couple of Region 9 counties here that are showing detections within 5 miles. Now, I'm not talking about particular levels, but on that EWG database, they're just have detects. So I don't know if those are particularly high levels. I think going to Matt's database might be a little bit better way to look at that. And then you could, from that EWG database, we were able to dive down into the tribal nations that have those contamination sites within 5 miles of their lands. So the other thing that our work group has done is submit comment letters. I want to just run through a couple of these. In December 2020, we wrote to Washington Department of Ecology. They submitted a PFAS chemical action plan. We pointed out that their action plan really focused only on those 2 chemicals, those 2 PFOS and PFOA, and weren't really taking a class base, not addressing this over 600 forms of PFAS that are in commerce right now. So we suggested that they take more of a class-based approach like the European Union is doing right now. We're suggesting they move to eliminate non-essential uses. And then we also thought labeling of consumer products was important. We wanted the state of Washington to also include guidance for tribes and to, as I was kind of saying before, monitoring strategies, not just of water, but of natural resources in the state. We also submitted comments on the destruction and disposal of PFAS, suggesting they add documentation. This is, as Matt said, this is just a guidance. It's documentation on unique tribal exposures and identification of potentially vulnerable populations. One of the incineration facilities for that, I think, is in Nevada. So we want to understand what's being released from the stacks that are used in that incineration destruction process. And then just most recently, we commented on the tribal baseline water quality standards. As you know, there is no federal requirement or no standard for PFAS, though some states currently are have PFAS requirements, and we felt that for reservations that want these standards, they should be included in the baseline water quality standards that EPA is establishing for tribes with that don't have TAS. Then finally, I wanted to touch on a new project that I'm involved in. It's a RESIS, a Regional Sustainability and Environmental Science project on PFAS site investigations. It's just going to start off our first meetings next month, where EPA's planning to leverage their existing data that already has been collected on PFAS occurrences and sources, and apply advanced computational tools and mapping methodologies, uses a tiered analytical chemistry approach to identify locations where source reductions might be possible. So I'm really interested in seeing how that goes, and maybe we can post some of the outcomes of that project on our work group page. Finally, just to reach out to the work group, you can contact Paige Hinkst or myself, and we'd be happy to reach out to you. So that ends my presentation. I'm going to hit stop sharing, and hopefully that'll work, and turn my camera on so I can see you guys. And I'm happy to take any questions. And Matt too. And I will not hit the stop screen. Oh, we have 13 minutes left, it looks like, Matt. So
I don't see any questions in the chat box, and I'm looking to get, or the presentation has been uploaded, but just finding it might be a little tricky, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, I think we have a different user interface maybe than the attendees, so I can't see. I looked around trying to figure out how to download Diane's presentation, and I couldn't see how to do
well,
it.
I did upload it into the Excel events website, so it should be up there. Do you see it, Marisol?
I can see it on, I think it's the page for the conference. So if you click on the lobby page, so if you find the breakout sessions and you click on this session, the title of it, it'll pop up a description of it. And if you scroll down, the 2 presentations should be in that pop-up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll put my email in the chat here too, if anybody wants to ask for a copy of the presentation. I'd be happy to send it to you too.
I can do that as well.
Yeah, that might be a good idea. And Matt, I would like very much to share your presentation with our work group too, if that's okay.
Sure. I think that presentation is public information.
Great. Yeah, but it really is a great resource. I was clicking around on your links and found it very useful.
I was looking at the maps that you had created with the environmental working group, and I wanted to get into that. I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure. Well, that's nice to have one verbal.
You had listed a number of tribes around the country in your graphic that detection. And
the counties, you mean? The county level?
You have a slide that showed tribes.
Okay, I'll go to the tribe one. Here, let me share the screen.
Yeah.
Maybe I can do that. Oops. Are you able to see that? Are you seeing my screen? Okay.
I was just trying to better understand because it went by kind of quickly. So this is top 20 tribal lands with known potential PFAS contamination. So being listed on here doesn't mean there's definitely PFAS contamination.
Yeah, and then notice within 5 miles. So, that's something I think the EPA data, the reason we went kind of with the EWG, because it was easy to dive down into data like this, to say within 5 miles of these reservation boundary, did you see, was there a detect from an industrial site, in a drinking water site, or was there a known, I think they also have, military sites that were known to use it. So that's why they went this way. Or, it wasn't me that did this work. But it's,
I was just trying to better understand it. I'll look at it more when I
yeah, maybe look at this one, because it kind of shows the different facilities that EWG categorize PFAS contamination in. But I think it was useful because we were able to dive kind of more into their database, and we were not able to do that as easily with the EPA database. So
and it looks like Marisol has been able to add the link for downloading the documents to the chat. So if you go into the chat, you can go ahead and download that information.
Yes, and if there's issues doing that, people can email me and I can send you an email with the presentations. I'll add my email to the chat box.
Great. I'm not seeing any questions.
Well, I might encourage people to, this report that Matt talked about, this roadmap, was just released on Monday, and there's already been some pushback from industry on it. So it's kind of an interesting political issue, I think, that you can just follow and see how the users of PFAS are going to respond to this. So there's already pushback happening. So it's kind of an interesting story if you're like those sorts of things, like I do.
Pushback on the new roadmap, is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. It's impossible to achieve those sorts of things. Just check the news, and you'll see some news stories on it.
I think people are also concerned about contaminated sites and how we're going to address. We may have active contaminated sites where we'll go in, do some remediation, but what might be the implications for sites that are already considered remediated and have been closed and are no longer active cleanups? And so I think that's been a concern for people as well. And I would just like to note that what we're seeing, this is just a very general trend, is that a lot of the much higher concentrations are on the East Coast, where PFAS chemicals were manufactured and were released from manufacturing plants, chemical manufacturing plants. Here in the West, in general, we've been end users, not manufacturers. I don't know of any manufacturing except for maybe a very small scale facility in Southern California long ago. So there's so what we're seeing in the West are not the concentrations and impacts that result from manufacturing of these chemicals. What we're seeing are the impacts from end use of these chemicals, in particular firefighting foam, as I mentioned. And we can have still some pretty high concentrations as a result of firefighting foam use, particularly if that gets into groundwater. So, we're not out of the woods, but luckily, we're not seeing some of the really widespread high concentrations that we've seen in some areas on the East Coast.
And the Midwest, Matt, do you know why those numbers in Michigan are so high?
I think Michigan had some manufacturing, but I don't know the full history for Michigan. Sorry.
Okay. No, I know. It's just when even if you look at the EPA map, Michigan just is really high. It seems almost unique. So.
Well, and we're seeing some interesting results of that too, particularly Lake Michigan. We're seeing PFAS foams that have been forming at the shore and different things like that. So they've got a wide range of problems with PFAS in Michigan.
Okay.
We're also seeing PFAS at areas where we concentrate our waste here in the West. Landfills, landfill leachate, wastewater treatment plants, biosolids from wastewater treatment plants. I think we're going to have to be much more careful with the biosolids that in the past we've felt pretty confident to use biosolids as fertilizers, and we've done in areas that are used for grazing or even potentially agricultural uses, but also certainly in forested areas we've been doing land spreading of biosolids, and we're going to have to reevaluate some of those practices and make sure that we're not causing any problems with PFAS in those areas. And it's particularly important because of the potential bioaccumulation of these compounds and their persistence in the environment.
Well, I don't see any other questions. Suppose that we could wrap this up, Matt, and take 3 extra minutes in our day.
I think we can. I wanted to mention something from your presentation, and I may have closed the window. Let me open it again. I apologize. I comment a little bit on your slides where you had mentioned a class-based approach.
Yep.
For compounds, and I'll just mention that EPA has typically regulated, individually, one by one, and that's something that works for chemicals that are not in a similar class. But here we have PFAS compounds, and there are several classes of PFAS, but there's a lot of similar classes. So EPA is looking at whether we can regulate these in a class-based manner, and there's some precedents for this within the world of PCBs. So I think we may be able to head in that direction. I think that would be a good thing, in my opinion, but we'll have to see where we end up with that. Mostly focused on PFOA and PFOS. Once we get through that process, then we can turn our attention to the question of class-based regulatory approaches.
Yeah, good point. And I don't think we just have time to go over this hundreds of PFAS compounds currently in commerce. So we have to do something like this.
And yes, indeed, I agree, but we'll have to see what happens. I mean, that's my opinion. That's not an official EPA statement. That's my opinion that it would be a good thing to do. And the other things that you mentioned here, eliminating non-essential uses, labeling, additional guidance, monitoring strategies, these are all things that I think you'll see mentioned in the new roadmap, though people are wondering how ambitious that may be, but that's the way we're heading. So I think we're generally on the same page.
I agree.
Though I feel like we are going to have to Region 9 and from the tribal perspective to make sure that whatever gets done applies appropriately as well.
Well, thanks everyone for attending, and I think we're going to get kicked out of here.
All right. Take care, folks.
Bye.
Thanks for attending.
I'm going to stop broadcasting now.